LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, Michael Lewis on Sam Bankman-Fried, The Art of Storytelling and Being Unreasonably Happy. The first time we tried to get Michael Lewis on the show was back in February 2022. He just released an audiobook of Liar's Poker, the book that made him famous 30 years ago. We thought it was a good time to talk with him about what he'd learned in the 3 decades since. Decades in which he'd become America's foremost financial journalist and arguably the nation's greatest storyteller. His team declined. Michael was out of the country, they said, working on a new book. When pressed for details, the only thing they'd tell us was, trust me, it's fascinating. 9 months later, on November 11th, 2022, their cryptic response suddenly made sense.
The cryptocurrency world is reeling after the meltdown of one of its most popular trading platforms.
Sam Bankman-Fried stepping down as CEO of FTX as his crypto exchange files for bankruptcy.
His net worth was more than $26 billion. It's now down to zero.
There's so much we don't know.
Well, here's what we know. He's broke.
And he's in big trouble. He's in big trouble.
That same day, a Hollywood agent fired off an email to movie execs. It read, "For the past 6 months or so, Michael Lewis has been traveling with and interviewing Sam Bankman-Fried. His childhood, early success on Wall Street, embrace of effective altruism, and the creation of a crypto empire that catapulted him in record time into the ranks of the richest people in the world seemed more than sufficient for a signature Michael Lewis book. Of course, the events of the past week have provided a dramatic surprise ending to the story." The agent added, "Michael hasn't written anything yet, but the story has become too big for us to wait. Let me know if I've piqued your interest." We sent another note to Michael's team. OMG. From a storytelling perspective, it seemed too good to be true. FTX had imploded. $8 billion worth of customer deposits had vanished. Sam Bankman-Fried, the boy wonder who was supposed to make crypto safe, was about to be indicted.
This case is about fraud. Fraud is fraud. It does not matter the complexity of the investment scheme. It does not matter the amount of money involved. If you mislead and deceive to take what does not belong to you, we will hold you accountable.
And Michael Lewis, the master of right place, right time reporting, had a front row seat. But when Michael's book Going Infinite was finally published, the response was unexpected. When Sam was on top, the press hailed him as a golden boy, white knight, rock star, messiah. By the time Going Infinite hit shelves, Sam was on trial for fraud. The narrative had shifted dramatically. Those once fawning journalists now only wanted to see him as one thing, a villain. And Michael Lewis didn't deliver. Instead of an invective, he'd given the world a nuanced character study. Instead of cataloging Sam's duplicity, he depicted a brainy, zany man-child. Negligent, sure, but not the devilish perpetrator of a long con. As a result, Michael received some pretty harsh reviews.
Michael Lewis, who I gotta admit, was one of my favorite authors, but he really is stooping to a very new low here, with effectively a defense of Sam Bankman-Fried.
And when Sam was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison, some took it as proof that Michael Lewis had gotten it wrong. But to tell you the truth, the tarring and feathering of Sam Bankman-Fried never sat right with me. Was he a saint? Certainly not. Did he commit crimes? Yes. But was he a scheming, criminal mastermind cut from the same cloth as Bernie Madoff? I'm not so sure. Neuroscientists have figured out that as soon as we hear a punchline, our brains immediately scan back over the whole joke, looking for inefficiencies. Were there non-essential tangents, anomalies, anything that didn't point toward the payoff? If so, we don't laugh as hard. The same is true of stories. If every scene, every character trait doesn't serve the moral of the story, we like it less. This is what I think happened with Sam Bankman-Fried. we instinctively wanted a neat and tidy parable. Reality and Michael Lewis gave us something more complicated. When Michael's team got back in touch, letting us know that Going Infinite was about to be released in paperback, and Michael, at long last, was ready to come on the show, I knew that's what I wanted to talk with him about. What happens when the story people want isn't the one that they get? Why did this nuanced portrayal of Sam Bankman-Fried make so many people so uncomfortable? And how do we reconcile our primal desire for simple narratives with the complexity of real life? These are the questions I asked him when we got together in New York City last week. His answers surprised me. I think they might surprise you too.
AI moves fast, and the path forward isn't always clear. Cisco gives you the infrastructure, security, and insights to stay the course. Cisco, making AI work for you. Visit cisco.com/AI.
Michael Lewis, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Thanks for having me.
You are, some would say, the greatest living American storyteller. In the tradition of writers like Mark Twain and Truman Capote, you tell us stories that help us laugh at ourselves and understand our place in the world. Mark Twain told us stories about whitewashing fences and slavery and river adventures. You tell us stories about our distinctly modern and sometimes bizarre American world. The subprime mortgage crisis in The Big Short, the quantification of baseball in Moneyball, the high-frequency trading revolution in Flash Boys, and now with your latest book, Going Infinite, you've taken us inside the world of the crypto revolution by following the life of the now infamous Sam Bankman-Fried. The problem you've discovered with being the great American storyteller is that once in a while, when the kids are gathered around the campfire, they don't like the ending of the story. They want a different one. And this is what's happened with Going Infinite, it seems to me, in a way that seems unprecedented for you. You wrote a book that was almost a kind of satirical comedy about this hapless, socially incompetent kid with limp socks and crazy hair and precocious math skills who stumbles his way into becoming the wealthiest 29-year-old in the history of the world, and then stumbles his way into an $8 billion fraud and the collapse of his crypto empire. But that's not the story America wanted. The kids around the campfire wanted a story about a villain, a con man who hoodwinked innocent colleagues and defrauded innocent crypto investors. Some of the responses, as you know, have been withering. The New York Times, in a review titled "Even Michael Lewis Can't Make a Hero of Sam Bankman-Fried," said, "You had a front row seat from which you could apparently see nothing." The Times of London said, "You fell for your protagonist and may have maimed your long justified reputation in the process." Jacob Silverman in Airmail called it a colossal misfire that completely exonerates its protagonist without giving a moment's thought to his many victims. Why won't you give your readers the story they seem to want?
I can't tell a story. It's not true. First off, the responses, you just read the worst responses. We can just look at the cover here.
Yeah.
It says a stupendously pleasurable book to read, The New Yorker, an instant classic, The Atlantic, insanely readable, and I devoured it, The Guardian. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
So this book got some of the best reviews I've ever gotten.
Interesting.
By the best writers who've ever reviewed my books.
Yeah.
If you parse it a little more carefully, you'll see that The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Times Literary Supplement, The London Review of Books, the tonier places with the better writers loved it. So it was a kind of weird expectation on the part of some of the, especially the hot takes, the people who read it first, that they didn't know what to do with it. Because I guess they thought what they thought about Sam Bankman-Fried. I had, as you say, a ringside seat to this thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think, no one's pointed out to me, like, what I left out. That was so, and in fact, I've had prosecutors tell me, you supplied us with a lot of useful information.
Interesting.
I'll give you an example. Towards the end of the book, when it all starts to fall apart, I asked Sam Bankman-Fried what he would have done if anybody would have guessed that the FTX depositor's money was not in FTX in cold storage, but was in his own private hedge fund to be done with what he wanted to do. And he looks at me, and it's in the book. And he says, I either wouldn't have answered the question if they asked me, or I'd have made a word salad. I mean, he admits that he was, right. I mean, he just admits in a way he never did in the trial.
Interesting.
So I think the book got misread by people who wanted to misread it. And I think it's their problem, not my problem. And I also think that it's a misreading of the situation to try to paint it as a con from the start, because it clearly was not that. They stumbled into the fraud. They didn't design a fraud. They didn't like open an exchange in order to steal people's money. They didn't even really want to open an exchange. They tried to sell their software. They got themselves in a situation where they should have thought this through a bit more. But when they opened FTX, they right from the start took depositors' money inside of Alameda Research rather than FTX. So it was always at their little fingertips. Right. And they didn't...
Which was necessary, as I understand it.
It was necessary, but for awful crypto reasons, the FTX couldn't get bank accounts. And this isn't like a secret. You can see the wiring instructions. When you were, I don't know, Jump Trading or Jane Street or Hudson River Trading, depositing your $100 million onto FTX, you knew you weren't sending it to FTX. This didn't seem to bother anybody at the beginning. I think they thought, oh, well, it's crypto. Oh, they can't get bank accounts. Okay, it's fine that Sam is using Alameda Research's bank accounts to warehouse our money. Nobody complained. But the fact it was there and available right from the start meant that when there was trouble, there was a risk he was going to use it in a way he shouldn't have used it. And the problem was really starting, like it collapses in November, but in June before that. And so like to sort of say Sam Bankman-Fried was this born con man who was set out to do this, it's just wrong. It's much less interesting than the actual story, which is he was this person wholly ill-suited to be in this sort of role, both because of the kind of risk profile he had and because of the way he failed to relate to other people or feel what other people felt. He was, no one should be entrusting their money with Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Just nobody should.
Although that's not what you said when you first met him, right?
No, well, that's true. When I met him, I thought, what could go wrong? But just to finish this is where it gets really weird to me. These sort of hot takes that are hostile to the idea that he's a human being is more complicated than just like this cartoon villain. I don't actually start writing this book until 2 months after it all collapses. I don't even have a contract to write the book. I've just been loitering. I've been watching this, trying to figure out what the story is, because I can't figure it out.
Yeah.
I just know there's scenes, their characters, there's situations that are bizarre. He'll take you into the world of high-frequency trading and into American politics, and that there's potential there. But I don't have a sense of the story. I don't have like a thesis. So
you don't have an ending.
I don't have an ending, but I don't have a beginning because I don't have an ending.
Right.
I have not laid this thing out. And so when I sit down to lay this thing out, I already know everything we know, basically. The trial, there were bits and pieces in the trial that were news to me, not much. So like, why would I whitewash it? All the pressure, all on me, all the social pressure was to cave to that numbnut, oh, he's just a villain crook guy, and make him worse than he actually is. All the pressure. And I knew when I published it that I'd be facing this sort of Twitter rage, and that's just the price. And let me tell you one other thing, then I'll to shut you up maybe about this on the subject, but maybe I won't shut you up.
Okay.
It reminded me of Moneyball. Moneyball came out, the same outrage. It was like, oh, he's completely missed the story. Oh, he didn't write about the star pitchers of the Oakland A's. All of baseball. Everybody who had a vested interest in their opinion about baseball hated it. And the anger was so loud. It was so loud. It was louder than this.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The only reason there wasn't the mechanism to amplify the voices. So Twitter didn't exist in the same way, right? But it was just constant hostility towards the book. And I thought, like, why is that? Why does this response remind me of that response? In that case, you could see it was threatening to a lot of people's jobs, sports writers and scouts and who thought they knew baseball. And I thought it was kind of the same thing but it was all these people, mainly on Twitter, but not just entirely on Twitter, had persuaded themselves they knew exactly what had gone on and who Sam Bankman-Fried was when they spent zero time with him, not done any of the work, and they'd anchored themselves in their opinions about this event. publicly. They'd been out there like, oh, I'm the authority. And when something comes in that's actually well-informed because I'd spent a year interviewing people and getting to know the situation, and it does not completely rhyme with their take, it's embarrassing to them. They have to defend their place. So that's what you're seeing.
Isn't there also a sense that people wanted you to deliver and communicate a sense of moral judgment and outrage? And that's not what you see your role as being.
It's never been my role.
Yeah.
Liar's Poker. I mean, I'm sorry. Liar's Poker, when Liar's Poker came out, half the people were outraged and half the people wanted to go and work on Wall Street after they read the book.
Right.
Because I just backed away from like taking a stand. I left the reader to fill in their, color in the story with their own moral judgments in the situation. I felt exactly the same with this. It's just sort of like you leave a hole. Like, what do you think about this? What do you feel about this? I'm not going to tell you to hate Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm not going to tell you to like him. It's just like, this is who he is. There's an awful lot in there that I can tell you that people who were not already anchored in an opinion and who've read the book come at me with opinions ranging from, God, it's so sad that happened. And I can't believe the autistic kid is spending 25 years in jail when everybody got their money back. All right. So that's one take. On the other end of the spectrum, I had people come at me, I read the book, he's a sociopath and he should be put away for life.
Yeah.
So the book leaves people with the ability to go either direction. And the fact that I'm not like joining this idiot chorus, I mean, that idiot chorus is filled with people who will never write a good book. And one day when they're old and they look back on their careers, maybe they'll understand this kind of response and this sort of approach to the world and material is the reason they'll never write a good book.
Well, one thing that I think is missing from a lot of this in this conversation in the debate about the accuracy of the assessment of Sam Bankman-Fried is the fact that the story itself is hysterically funny in places, right? I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried is just this ridiculous character in an outlandish situation. Here's this guy, I'm quoting you, with hair exploding off his head in every direction, eyes darting around, wearing this wrinkled t-shirts and cargo shorts that he might have slept in last night in his beanbag chair, his knees jackhammering at 4 beats per second. What was it like hanging out with Sam Bankman-Fried and watching him interact with the world?
Did you ever read Confederacy of Dunces?
It's so funny you say that. I was thinking of him as like a younger
Ignatius
J. Riley, right? Exactly.
Obviously, he's got a different worldview. But the fact is that, remember Ignatius Riley had this worldview, and the worldview was so bizarrely out of step with everybody else's world in the world around him. And it sort of created this naturally comic situation whenever he did anything.
Yeah.
Sam was the same way. It's like he had a worldview that, it led him to a tragic end, but the worldview was as persistently held as Ignatius Riley's worldview. And it was as out of step with the world around him. And so there was this constant comedy. The fact that this person who had been basically friendless until about the age of 20, basically socially isolated, had become the life of the party, who everybody wanted to be with. Katy Perry meets him and says she wants to quit her job and come work at FTX. It was, how does this happen kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I thought Sam as a character was interesting to me from beginning to end, only in part because of who he was as a person. It was more how he lit up the world around him. He just cast it all in a different light. And he was a tool for me to do stuff I really wanted to do, like, for example, explore the world of high-frequency trading on Wall Street, where he had worked, or get into how money works in American politics these days. It's just was like one thing after another. That every situation he was in, he made.
And the blockchain revolution, crypto.
Yes. He made it all. It wasn't the definitive explanation of anything, but it was a different explanation of everything, and that was just endlessly interesting. And my literary problem, which I had until it all collapsed, was that I just had this bundle of stuff. It was clearly material, but it didn't add up to a narrative. I didn't know how to structure the thing. I had this conversation that we can dial up the dude and he can confirm it, but famous film director and I happened to be at an event together 2 days before FTX collapsed. And I said to him, I said, I got this problem. I spent a year gathering this stuff. Let me tell you about the stuff. And you tell me whether you're hearing a story, you're hearing a book in this.
Yeah.
And at the end of the conversation, I would talk for an hour about Sam, about what I'd witnessed. And he said, man, this stuff is great. He said, it'll never be a movie because you don't have an ending. And I said, I don't care if it's a movie. I said, is it a book? And he says, you can trick people in a book to thinking you have an ending. You can't do it in a movie. And I said, I don't even know. I don't know if I have a book. And then 2 days later, he actually emails me and says, can I direct the movie? When it all collapsed, he said, oh my God, you got your third act. You got your third. But until I had that ending, until I knew where it was landing, I had no idea what to do with any of this stuff. I certainly wasn't setting out to like write some hagiography of Sam Bankman-Fried. It was just like, it was this social comedy. It was a mechanism.
It was a satire.
It was a satire.
Right.
That's right.
See, he's this parody of like a zero attention span millennial, literally playing video games while being interviewed on television.
But I tell you what, it's so consistent. The character interacting with the situation in peculiar ways. It tells you about the situation. I promise you that it's still going on, that there is going to be either a superb prison memoir from Sam Bankman-Fried or someone in prison with him is going to write a book about watching Sam in prison that's going to make prison look different than you ever thought of prison. And that's just how he is. He's magical as a character. So there's this byproduct. This is what bothered people, I think, is that it is possible you will read this book and like Sam Bankman-Fried.
Right.
Now, that doesn't bother me. In fact, just the opposite. None of this would have happened if people didn't like Sam Bankman-Fried. If people instantly saw a monster villain.
This is part of the story. The story is about more than Sam Bankman-Fried.
It's more than Sam Bankman-Fried.
There are a lot of stakeholders here.
That's right. And it's like, you don't get 100 and something venture capitalists investing in his business and every Wall Street CEO wanting to be with him and every celebrity wanting to be his friend. If the reader doesn't get the charm of him at all, they'll never understand how this happened. So it had to be done. Like you had to be able to lure the reader into the possibility of actually sympathizing with this character. And that was fun. That's just fun. Right. I mean, it is true. If I were going to critique myself here, in a less idiot-like way, it would be, I do have the problem that I can't write things that aren't fun. If I'm not having fun, the reader's not having fun, I don't want to do it. Right. So the fact that I allowed myself to have fun with the material, well, maybe there's something morally objectionable about that.
Right.
But I also suspected when I sat down to write it, everybody's going to get their money back. So nobody was saying that at the time, by the way. Yeah. And so I had a harder time getting all worked up about the victims because I thought, geez, they're probably going to get it all back. And it's not as dark as a story as like the Madoff story.
Yeah. And do you think of yourself as a humorist or a satirist? I love this anecdote about learning that you write with headphones on, and your wife and kids have said to you, "Do you realize, Dad, that when you're sitting there writing, you're laughing the whole time?"
So my wife has said this to me. She, in hotel rooms when I've had to write, she said. She puts it another way. You realize you're laughing at your own jokes is basically what she said. And it's true. So I don't think, I'm a satirist. I do think of myself as finding a kind of pleasure in the world around me before I describe that world. I have to be excited about the material. And one way I can sort of sense the excitement is if I'm laughing. If you're laughing, you're in an emotional space. And that's the goal. It's to get into the emotional space. Once you're laughing, it's easier to cry. Once you're crying, it's easier to laugh. And I don't like the unemotional space.
Interesting.
It's very hard for me to generate a narrative that doesn't have an emotional space. And the trick is to get the reader into that emotional space so they can laugh and cry.
Your critics might say, Michael's having too much fun with this. There are victims involved, and he's just chuckling in the corner. Yeah. But it sounds like you would say, actually, I'm going to quote Mark Twain said, "Humor is the good-natured side of a truth." That humor is part of an emotional response. We are emotional animals, and we need to, if we want to engage. This is part of why you sell so many copies of your books, and people engage with those books. If you want to engage people to learn about all these aspects of the world that your books engage people with, you need to engage them emotionally. It's part of the process.
Well, let's think about, what does it matter to, I don't know, Sam Bankman-Fried's victims if my book is fun to read or if it's not fun to read? Like, it's not going to have any effect on their ability to get their money back. The damage is done. And in addition, the truth of it's not like I'm inventing the fun. The truth of the story was right up to the moment it got dark, it was funny. Yeah. And so, it doesn't mean that just because it got dark doesn't mean it wasn't funny the year before.
Right. These things can coexist.
Yes. Right.
I'd love to share with our listeners a little bit of this humor and this experience. I want to play a clip from the book. This is the scene in which Sam meets Anna Wintour.
"Hey, this is Sam," said Sam to his laptop as his Zoom box opened. Onto his screen popped Anna Wintour, editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine. She wore a tight yellow dress and careful makeup and a bob cut so sharply that its fringes plunged and curved down around her face, like the blades of two scythes. "I'm so happy to finally meet you," she said. "Hey, it's great to meet you too," Sam replied. Sam didn't really know who Anna Wintour was. He might or might not have been dimly aware that Meryl Streep had played her in The Devil Wears Prada, and that she had ruled the treacherous world of women's fashion since before Sam was born. She looked like $1 million, but her art, like all art, was wasted on Sam. When you asked Sam to describe a person's appearance, even a person he'd slept with, he'd say, "I don't really know how to answer that. I'm not good at judging how people look." As Anna Wintour began to speak, he clicked a button and she vanished from his screen. In her place popped his favorite video game, Storybook Brawl. He had only a few seconds to choose his character. He picked the Horde Dragon. "Yup," said Sam to whatever Anna Wintour was saying. He could still hear her through headphones. Unless she watched his eyes, she had no reason to think that he wasn't paying attention. Sam didn't want to seem rude. It was just that he needed to be playing this other game at the same time as whatever game he had going on in real life. His new social role as the world's most interesting new child billionaire required him to do all kinds of dumb stuff. He needed something other than what he was expected to be thinking about to occupy his mind. And so oddly, the more important he became in the eyes of the world, the more important these games became to him.
So Anna Wintour believes Sam's going to be the guest of honor at the Met Gala.
At least considering it.
Right. And
possibly, yes.
And he might even bankroll the whole thing.
Yes.
Are you in the room with him during this conversation?
So the way this happens, and a lot of the reporting, I'm just there, physically there watching it. He and I was trailing around behind him during the Super Bowl in Los Angeles. And I was trailing around behind him. I was with him, and it was me and him. And I was just seeing who wanted him and why. And we're going back to our hotel rooms in the morning, and he said, "I got to do this call with this woman." And I said, "Who?" And he says, she's like some fashion lady. And he pulls out his sheet, his itinerary. Her name is Anna Wintour. And I said, "You have a call with Anna Wintour?" I said, "You know who she is?" He goes, "Oh, no, who is she?" So I said, I explained who she was. And I said, "Could I just come watch?" He said, "Sure." And so I just positioned myself in a chair off to one side so she couldn't see me. And it was just me and him and his activities. And I got to say this, that I don't know where he gets this from. And this is it's sort of like, as part of a literary character, it's very endearing. He was never performative. He would forget I was there.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but he would just go into his zone. He was playing the video game frantically. And then after he's done the call, he's like, "Oh, you're here," kind of thing. And so it's kind of ideal from the point of view of the writer. You feel like you can watch him without him behaving as if he's being observed.
Yeah.
And this was also true in the office. You know, they'd had open plan office with lots of rows of identical desks, and he would sit there. I could watch him, and I feel like I was watching someone who wasn't aware that other people were around him and watching him. So the unself-consciousness of it was useful and funny.
And I wonder, you write, people who encountered him often thought he was the most interesting person they'd ever met. I wonder how much of that had to do with his $22 billion value recorded at the Fortune magazine.
Yes, of course.
Right, because the same behavior might be received poorly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. If you did exactly the same thing, but he was the poor guy, everybody thought this is a freaking weirdo.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's what they thought of him in high school.
Right.
Right. He isn't. And the high school people who would encounter him would say he hasn't changed. How did he get $22 billion?
Yeah.
It's like that happened.
Yeah.
And without any kind of new polish being put on him or anything.
Right.
But once The same, well, think about it happening to you or me. If all of a sudden you or I walked out of here and we had $22 billion and everybody knew it, it'd be amazing how interesting people would find us. Really, your slightest, your light quip would be the wittiest thing that anybody ever said. God, you're so good looking. It would just, it's amazing with $22 billion.
Right. And that's part of what you were able to watch and document.
Yeah.
This impact. And how, the cynical view of Sam is that he was changed by this glamorous lifestyle. He went to the Super Bowl with Katy Perry and Orlando Bloom. He paid Tom Brady and Giselle nearly $75 million for 1 week of work.
No, three weeks.
3 weeks of work.
Yeah.
So was he delighting in it? Do you think there was any starfucker inside of Sam?
A little bit. I think of it this way. I think the best way to describe the way he got maybe a little overabsorbed by his grandiose role. He thought of all these people who rolled in his life and wanted to play a part in it and be a part of his life as really souped up pieces in a great board game. Like you're playing a board game, it's a competition, and it's like you play chess and all of a sudden you can acquire a queen that's got special powers, and that's the celebrity. And you get to put it on the board and use that to play it too.
Right.
That's how he thought of it. It's like, this is exciting because I can use it in the board game.
Right. And it was useful, and he really was. I mean, a lot of people make fun of or see his putting FTX on the side of the stadium and a lot of these very dramatic marketing spending as ridiculous. But then again, he was running a very large business that needed marketing.
And it was generating a lot of revenues.
And it was working to some degree.
It seemed like it was working. It was working to some degree. I mean, the business side of it, the venture capitalists value that crypto firm before he took all the money out of it, at $40 billion, right? So it looked like it was working. His relationship to celebrity, though, that's interesting because beyond their use value, I did not get the sense he was like particularly jazzed by, I'm going to go hang with Katy Perry. It wasn't occupying a lot of his brain space. He didn't seek it out nearly as much as he could have. It was, are they useful to me as pieces in my board game? And with them, he didn't behave any differently.
Yeah.
He was still, he was exactly him. I never saw him behave differently. I never saw, even in prison now, he's the same guy. I never saw any variation. There's this kind of weird evenness. Yeah. I mean, he'd get more jittery or less jittery.
Right.
And people would interpret that as he took too many meds or didn't take his meds or whatever.
Right.
But there'd be that, a kind of hyperness. But beyond that, very consistent in his behavior, and not, there wasn't a sense of that kind of oleaginous, charming, I'm with a celebrity person.
Yeah. Well, I want to share another wonderful moment in the book. This is you meeting Sam to fly to D.C. to meet with Mitch McConnell.
Towards the end of July 2022, I met Sam beside the tarmac of a private airfield in Northern California. As usual, he was late. When he finally arrived, he didn't so much step as tumble out of the back of a black car. Instead of a suitcase, he carried what appeared to be a small pile of old laundry. As he drew closer, I saw that it was a blue suit and a button-down Brooks Brothers shirt. "This is my D.C. suit," he said almost apologetically. "Normally I leave it in D.C." 6 hours in the future, he was meant to have dinner with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, whom he'd never met. He'd been briefed that McConnell would be offended if he arrived in shorts. "McConnell really cares about what you wear," said Sam, as he walked up the steps of the private plane and plopped the suit ball onto his spare seat. "Also, you need to call him Leader, or Leader McConnell, or Mr. Leader. I rehearsed it to make sure I didn't fuck it up, especially since it's so tempting to call him Dear Leader." I eyed the ball of clothes. Its wrinkles were not new and shallow, but old and deep, reversible only with time and effort. It was hard to see how these clothes would be of any use in this situation. "Do you have a belt?" I asked. "I do not have a belt," he said, as he reached into a basket of vegan snacks, grabbed a sack of popcorn, and dropped into his seat. "Shoes?" No shoes," he said. It was as if he'd only received a single explicit instruction. Bring a suit. Whoever had sent it had neglected to add, make sure it's wearable, and that you have whatever else you need to satisfy Mitch McConnell's need for his dinner companions to appear formally dressed. And so Sam had not bothered to consider what else might be needed for a suit if it were to be successfully worn. He did this kind of thing a lot.
What a scene. Just priceless. Sam's actual philanthropic activities were confounding to many people, right? He ended up donating $1 million to a super PAC aligned with Mitch McConnell.
Much more than that. 30 million. I think it was like 30 million.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
He poured $10 million into the failed congressional bid of Carrick Flynn, who was trying to become the first effective altruist in Congress. That was a disaster. What's your take on his actual philanthropic activities? Were they actually effective or in keeping with his effective altruistic presumed ambitions or not so much?
He sort of jumped the shark here from the point of view of the effective altruist community because it was never on their list of things to do to get involved in politics. The effective altruist would have said, you can't predict how that money is going to end up affecting things. We don't know that if you elect this person, you're going to be saving lives in Africa or saving future lives. But Sam had decided all by himself that Donald Trump presented an existential threat to democracy, and an existential threat to democracy was an existential threat to the tools we need to deal with existential threats. And so he had to prevent Donald Trump from getting in power. That's why Mitch McConnell was interested in him, because they shared that view. The important thing about his political spending was, yes, there was some political spending aimed at getting the kind of crypto laws that he wanted, but the biggest chunk of it was anti-Trump. It was really just pure anti-Trump.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's philanthropy. The philanthropy is still an untold story. And you can't even tell it yet because they did manage to give away about $200 million. It's not much compared to what they had planned to give away, but they had a really interesting way of going about it. Might have been cuckoo, but it might have been brilliant. They picked the subjects that interested them, and they were all existential risks. It was like preventing meteors from hitting the Earth, or preventing the next pandemic, or preventing artificial intelligence from eating us all. That's what interested them. And they said, instead of what philanthropies normally do, we solicit proposals and we'll evaluate the proposals, which is very expensive and time consuming. They said, let's identify credible experts in this area and just email them $1 million and say, your job is to give it away. Give it away in the ways that's going to maximize an effect. And I only grazed a bit in this. I've talked to people who got on the receiving end of like the $100,000 grant. And I was kind of impressed, the stuff I was hearing. It was really smart, often kind of youngish people who didn't have to take the job at Goldman Sachs all of a sudden. They could go do this other thing. And I think that's probably going to be an interesting piece of journalism to go back once you see what these people did and see what effects this had.
So this might do some good.
Might do some good. I don't know.
Right. Well, and we had Will McCaskill on the show, and I could see him and the effective altruist saying, you know, Donald Trump is a threat to the future of democracy in the U.S. at a moment when AI is accelerating. This is dangerous, and that it does make sense to take a very, very small percentage of all philanthropic giving to try to keep that from happening.
But Will wasn't actually saying that at the time. Will was sort of like, Sam's doing this and it's causing some trouble. And, but I could see why you do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't seem unreasonable to me, but what I'm saying is it seemed unreasonable to other effective altruists, including some of the effective altruists who worked at FTX. So it was a source of some conflict among them, and it was all Sam's doing. So you get to like motive there. And once he starts especially getting into politics, and he's a player, that's where I sensed that, not with celebrity, but with the politics stuff, that some of it went to his head a bit. There was a grandiosity.
Yeah.
I can help figure out who's going to be president.
Right.
That it was Judge Kaplan, when the judge who sentenced him to 25 years and is sort of trying to figure out from the stand who Sam Bankman-Fried is while he's sentencing him, he actually kind of got to this. He sort of said, your motive wasn't money. Agreed. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Your motive was power.
Right.
You wanted immense power. And
you think there's some truth in that?
I think there's truth to that.
Interesting. And do you think that his dedication to, I mean, a lot of the critics see the whole effective altruist supposed allegiance that he had as a fraudulent, and obviously it's tarnished the whole movement to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And there were certainly moments that, you know, there were a few pieces of the critics' arguments that to me that gave me pause. One was, I'm sure you're familiar with this moment in 2022 when Sam was on Bloomberg's Odd Lots podcast and explained a form of crypto investing called yield farming in such a way that the host, Matt Levine, replied this way.
I think of myself as like a fairly cynical person. And that was so much more cynical than how I would have described farming. Like, you're just like, well, I'm in the Ponzi business and it's pretty good.
So on the one hand, I think that's a pretty reasonable response. But let me play around with this a little bit, right? Because that's one framing of this. And I think there's like a sort of depressing amount of validity.
It was a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. Ponzi
No,
scheme.
Sam was describing his own industry as being filled with Ponzi schemes.
Right.
Which it's sort of like a charming openness. This is before it all fell apart. And it was accurate. He was honest.
Right.
He's getting in trouble for being honest there. But
was this an ends justifies the means kind of point of view that basically it doesn't matter if we're involved in.
So Alameda might have was doing a little of that, but that wasn't the business of FTX. FTX was just an exchange. It was just a casino. That had Sam was helping them understand something that was going on in crypto that was pretty trivial in Sam's own business life. And in that case, it's sort of charming that the businessman is willing to say, yeah.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. Behind the scenes, this is a counter example. I've had interactions with very serious people in the world of corporate bankruptcy. And between the two of us, when we're sitting over drinks, they say to me, our whole industry is a racket. It is absolute racket.
Right.
It's not about getting creditors back their money. It's about maximizing our take. And we know that. They would never go on the Odd Lots podcast and say it.
Yeah.
I'd prefer them to say it.
Right. Okay.
And so I prefer to have people. That's not a.
Right. It was almost a moment of integrity.
Yeah, totally. So there's a little hard. I don't get worked up about that. And I also think, apropos of the effective altruism, it's really silly to try to argue that Sam Bankman-Fried wasn't serious about effective altruism. It was his identity. What's not silly to argue was the whole movement a little cockeyed and screwy? And did it lead him to have a kind of screw loose about what his motives were in the world and purpose on earth?
Right.
But he wasn't using it as like cover for, I'm a fraud and no one will guess it if I say I'm an effective altruist.
Right. Because this started when he was 12, I think.
Yes.
Right. His parents were embraced the kind of utilitarianism. Yeah. Right. I mean, this was kind of, he became a vegan at a young age.
It's like
you can't question that. I mean, I guess you could question whether his suddenly becoming a $22 billion, youngest billionaire in history, whether that modified his convictions,
made him more grandiose.
Yeah.
Problem was the grandiosity. It's all of a sudden, hey, I can save humanity. All of his status was wrapped up in being the most important effective altruist.
Right.
It was a kind of Jesus thing, a little savior thing. That's where he got himself in trouble. It's like he suspected he was special and important. All of a sudden, the world confirms that he's special and important, and he runs with it.
Is that grandiosity what ultimately led to Sam's undoing? Michael shares his theory of the case when we come back.
Intuit Enterprise Suite integrates powerful multi-entity financial management tools with payments processing, payroll, HR, marketing, and more. With AI-powered automation, forecasting, and industry customization, businesses can make faster decisions and boost productivity. Visit intuit.com/enterprise to learn more. Money movement services by Intuit Payments, Inc., licensed by NYDFS.
The future with AI is moving fast, but progress takes more than speed. It takes direction. Cisco gives you the infrastructure, security, and insights to implement AI with purpose, from data centers to workplaces. We don't just help you keep up, we help you lead. Cisco, making AI work for you. Visit cisco.com/AI. That's cisco.com/AI.
So Sam's empire all falls apart. Why does it fall apart? And why doesn't Sam, who prides himself on being a probabilistic thinker, see it coming?
Well, let's just pause for a moment on describing Sam as a probabilistic thinker.
Yeah.
It is true. When you're with him, it's constant. The expected value of this is this. The probability of that is 1 in 100. But where are these probabilities coming from? Approximately his rear end. That he's assigning probabilities to things that nobody knows the probability of.
Right.
And he's saying, oh, it's not perfect, but it's good enough.
Yeah.
And then acting as if it's perfect.
Yeah.
And so he's already getting himself in trouble by having more certainty about his judgments because he's put a number on a thing to which no number should be put. And so that's one thing.
Yeah.
So it isn't just probabilistic thinking. It's sort of, this is the equivalent of using effective altruism as a cover for something else. It's using probabilistic thinking as a cover for like radical intuitive judgment. So that's one problem. But how it all goes bad, the trial like confirmed what I thought, which was they were fine, even though the money was in the wrong place and it shouldn't have been, but they were fine until about June of 2022. And in June of 2022, when crypto prices collapse and everybody gets spooked, crypto banks, sort of banks in quotation marks, that had lent Alameda Research, Sam's firm, about $10 billion, all wanted their money back. And they didn't have it except in the form of customer deposits. Sam had taken that money that he'd borrowed from them and plowed a lot of it into illiquid investments, like a stake in Anthropic or a piece of SpaceX or whatever. And they handed over the customer deposits, leaving in place essentially a venture capital fund funded by the customer deposits without informing the customers this is what they'd done.
And Bitcoin had collapsed and all these other things. And they'd run some numbers to look at what it would look like and I think had assessed like a 20% risk or.
Yeah, he started the probability that it's all going to go bad is 5% or 10%. But the probability, you can't judge what's going to happen. A run on a bank is a run on a bank. And all it took was someone to say, oh, that your money might not be safe there. And because the world is so jumpy and so suspicious and mistrustful, the minute the run started and it became clear that they did not have enough to pay all the customers back, I mean, it was over. Now, there are a couple of interesting things about how it ended to me that nobody has really explored. One is in the couple of weeks of November of 2022, when it's collapsed, the claims on FTX, like if you were a customer with deposits and you wanted to sell your claim, they were selling at like 3 cents on the dollar.
Yes.
So the market thought he just incinerated all the money. It's gone.
Yeah.
And even I was close to it. Even I thought if I were writing a book, it would have been unethical. I would have been buying those claims.
You should have been. Scott Galloway, who we had on the show recently, did buy them.
Yes,
and made a lot of money.
Yeah. Made a lot of money. So I mean, because the claims now are trading at 110 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
They're trading above par. And the question is like, how did that happen? How did I knew what was in this pile of there were like 200 venture capital investments.
The Dragon's Lair.
And it wasn't just crypto. It was AI stuff. It was all over the map. And even if crypto had not bounced back, there was real value there. There was at least like 50 cents on the dollar.
Right.
And what's so interesting about this is caused a lot of tragedy. That the customers who didn't have real insight, who were scared, who needed, they sold their claims. They committed. I think someone may have committed suicide.
Oh, boy.
And if they had known what I knew, they would have known, hey, this isn't over. Like you may be getting money back, maybe all your money back. And what's really disturbing to me is that the bankruptcy people encouraged the despair.
Right.
The bankruptcy people came and saying, there's nothing here. It's all worthless. We're going to do our best to clean up this stuff and have the fire sales, but don't have any hope.
Yeah.
And that people paid a real price for that hopelessness. And I don't understand, first, why nobody's paid much attention to that. But also, it's just really telling about markets, how wrong they got that.
Right.
So, yes. And some of those claims were bought up by FTX insiders because they knew.
Interesting.
They knew.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But so Sam was guilty of fraud and you think that he should be in jail.
Yeah.
And
I didn't want to tell the reader that.
Right.
But I think starting in June of 2022, he did stuff that you shouldn't do. He deceived people. The way I think about it, because it's framed as theft in the courtroom, but he doesn't have a character of a thief. He is this person who has this almost pathological ability to foist risk upon other people without asking their permission. And it isn't just financial. It's social, emotional. It isn't malicious. He doesn't feel the risk. And it's sort of like he's not feeling anything, so he doesn't imagine you feeling anything. Right. Kind of thing.
And I get the sense that may be partly because he has a somewhat despairing, kind of anhedonic view of the world. I mean, he doesn't seem to experience much pleasure. This is what I think the Judge Kaplan had cited right before the sentencing, right? Was this anecdote about him saying if he could flip a coin and cause the whole world to disappear, or if it's heads and tails, it's 2.1 times better.
Right.
He would flip that coin.
Yeah.
Right. And part of that it strikes me as being very sad and tragic. That this is someone who really did not enjoy being alive a whole lot.
That's correct. I think that's correct. And I think it's also someone who has found an identity in an approach to risk, which is any really smart financial person would tell you is insane. It's the road to ruin, that eventually you're going to flip that coin and it's going to come up on the wrong side. And even though if each individual flip has an positive expected value, if the consequence of the flip going wrong is total ruin, it's going to be ruin. Yeah. And that's kind of what he did with his business.
Right.
There's a kind of insanity to it.
Yeah. And do you think he deserves 25 years?
No. And can I explain that?
Yeah.
Because of course, the 85 people on Twitter who are angry about the book will get angry all over about that. So I at least explain why they, how to be angry about that.
Yeah.
I don't understand why anybody gets 25 years. I mean, there are people who need to be taken off the streets. I'm sure they're like serial killers who shouldn't be on the streets.
Yeah.
We imprison people at a rate that no civilized society does. It's crazy how much we like to stick people in jail. And it's curious because we're also the society that most believes in second chances. So there's some weird thing we need to sort out here. So I don't think anybody should be in jail for 25 years unless they really are a danger to society. And I don't think he's a danger to the society. The judge tried to make the case that he needed to be disabled. This is preposterous. Sam Bankman-Fried, if he got out, would have no ability to wreak havoc in the financial system ever again. He'd be banned from the securities industry, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is the right punishment? And I think if you would have put me in that chair, I like Kaplan, I'd have been pissed that he got on the witness stand and perjured himself. There's some years you get for that, just so we deter people. But that's like, I would have started with a baseline of maybe a 5 or 6 year sentence, and I would have made it maybe 10.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where I would have gone.
In your last visit to the Bahamas, overnight, everything had collapsed. The place had emptied out. You likened it to New Orleans after Katrina. People were gone, but the belongings were still around. And you actually encounter Sam in the parking lot. Here's a clip.
The road from the airport to the Albany resort past FTX's offices. We slowed. The guard booth was empty. The barrier was down, but blocked as little of the road as ever. There was no sign of life on the field of asphalt. The cars were gone. The jungle hut seemed entirely abandoned. Then, on the far side of the lot, a figure rounded a hut and came into focus. It was Sam, all by himself, in a bright red t-shirt and shorts, walking circles around his former empire. Even at a distance, you could tell he could use a shower and a shave. He walked over and climbed into the car as if he'd been expecting us. He needed a ride home, which of course raised the question of how and why he'd come to be here in the first place. You know what's weird to think about, he said, as we left the office behind? Saturday, everything was normal.
At that moment, did you feel sorry for him?
Yeah, because I could see what was coming. You could see he was in jail then.
Yeah. Do you still feel sorry for him?
Yeah, I do. I feel sympathy because how to put this? There was a kind of tragic inevitability to the character in the society that it was like you weren't quite sure how it was going to come to grief, but he was not really ever made to live in the world. And I could see a slightly different world in which the people who were the real grown-ups, it's not that Sam wasn't legally an adult, but when he starts his business, he's like 24. And that the venture capitalists who encourage him, the world encourages him to be the way he is. And there's no checks. Like, no, he wasn't parented, basically. And even as a little kid, he wasn't really parented.
Yeah.
So it feels like someone should have put a stop to it before it got this far. So I felt sorry for him that way. On the other hand, I was surrounded then, at that point, by all these people whose lives were ruined by him. And the people whose lives were really ruined by him were the employees of FTX. They were people, especially the Asian employees, who were so all in that they had persuaded like their grandmothers to put all their savings on FTX. Yes.
Yeah.
And in addition, their reputations are ruined because they're presumed to be involved in this in some way. They're unemployable. So I could completely grok their anger.
Yeah.
And I felt some of that too. But even the people who were most damaged by him, they knew him and they couldn't hate him because it was sort of like he couldn't do anything but what he did. It was like a character in a novel, is what he felt like.
Interesting.
There was a lack of free will almost feel to it. So I felt bad for him. I did feel bad for him, and I still feel bad for him.
Yeah. And you know, I wonder sometimes how much this is kind of a case of competing stories, right? And I think you'd said this once about the actual trial. It's a case of competing stories. It would have been nice if the jurors had a copy of your book to read the other version of the story.
It's kind of a middle version. It wasn't even my book. Isn't his defense. It's definitely not his defense. Like the defense lawyers, there are a bunch of stuff in there they would not like to see the light of day. But it's not the prosecution, obviously, either. It's just fuller. It's just different. Like they're neither one of those lawyers would pretend if you got them over a drink that they were like telling the truth. They're like creating an argument.
Yeah.
My book's not an argument, it's a story.
And how much does it matter that we get the story right? And I'm going to start to answer this question by quoting you. You said, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves matter. It matters for each of us individually, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. I love this observation, and it seems to me we can expand it to say, on a societal level, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves matter. That, who the heroes are, who the villains are, most everyone is really somewhere in between. And telling those stories better, I mean, how much does that matter?
I think it matters hugely. And I tell you, in this case, I think it matters hugely. The villainization of Sam Bankman-Fried, the sort of mob response to him, that all of a sudden he's kind of Richard III, and this dark character who was manipulating everybody from the day he got out of the womb. What that does is it eliminates the need for the conversation that really needs to be had, which is, what are the systematic problems that actually created this situation? I mean, little things like, should the venture capital community look themselves in the mirror about how they invest and not encourage this without knowing what it is? So that's just one example. Should the political process, which is instantly manipulable by huge piles of money, look itself in the mirror and say, maybe we need to change the process rather than get angry at him for coming in with $50 million and getting people elected?
Yeah.
Should the
bankruptcy proceedings?
Right. The bankruptcy proceedings, like, there these, he sort of lit up inadvertently lots of systematic problems which nobody will pay attention to as long as they're paying attention to Sam Bankman-Fried, evil person. And so I think that the way you tell a story is very important. And there are these systematic issues that he inadvertently pointed out that need to be addressed. And telling the cheap story that bad guy got a hold of the society for a brief moment distracts us from the better conversation.
Yeah. It seems to me there's also a story here about neurodivergence, about people who see the world differently. I mean, Sam, certainly reading your book, sees the world very differently from probably you and I do. And, Nate Silver in his latest book we had recently on the show, and he's made the case that people who think probabilistically and are comfortable with risk are increasingly running the world. We can think of the world's richest man, right?
Yeah.
And so we need to understand these people, and we need to understand them, not either turn them into demons or saints, but understand the complexity of that outlook on the world.
Yeah, I would take it one step further, that if you aren't one of these people, if you don't think like basically the card counter at the blackjack table, you're the fool at the table. You're on the other end of their bets, one way or another. Yeah. And so we all need to actually learn to think a bit like them.
Yes, but exactly. When you were in 10th grade, you said to your English teacher, Dr. Francis, are you always this pleasant, or is this just an especially good day for you? You were sent to the headmaster's office. What did he say to you?
His name was Teddy Cotonio, and he's one of the great characters ever to have emerged from New Orleans. He was 5'4" and 300 pounds, and he had a big bald head and a big smile, and was very witty and caustic, and taught the greatest Russian literature class I've ever taken. Anyway, Teddy Cotonio, who had known me at that point basically for 11 years because I'd been in his school since kindergarten, he looks at me and he says, Michael, he said, like, basically, I remember he said, like, why? Like, why say that? He goes, I know she's not fun to be around, but why? Why are you here, kind of thing? And I said, like, she pissed me off, right? And he said, okay. He said, let's think strategically about how to deal with those emotions, kind of thing. And by the end, we were kind of laughing. And what he said to me in the end was, you're like the happiest person I know. I see you walking around here. You have no reason to be happy. You're not successful. You don't get good grades. You're not a star on the sports team. You just seem really happy. You're blessed with those genes. Make them work for you, not against you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that I was using my moment of fury with Dr. Francis to have a great deal of fun, I thought, at her expense. And it did make the class laugh, but he said you got to kind of control it.
Well, and you said that in that moment you had this recognition that this was true from your perspective, that you might have been the happiest person that you had met, and 10th grade was maybe the worst year of your life, and it's gotten incrementally better.
It's funny you say this, all true. And until I didn't frame my life as happy, unhappy, but when he said it, I realized, yeah, like this is absolutely true. I just got that gene and I completely get it. And even though I'm in the worst place of my life, it's still there. So that's true. He made me completely aware. He helped turn my life around. Him and the baseball coach, they worked together. They conspired. You know, this is something, it's funny how you hear things, especially when you're a kid. I watch it in my own son. My son is now 17. When I say something, when I sink his battleship, when I say something that is dead on right, the response is, oh, yeah, that's right. The response is silence. And mostly he's saying, no, you're full of it. And mostly he's just defending himself. But every now and then it's like a silence. And I can see him maybe, and every now and then having a moment like I had then. I didn't say, oh, yeah, you're right. I was like, huh. Right. I never thought of that. I walked out of his office and I thought, yeah,
right,
that's true.
And this may be why your books sell as well as they do and create so much joy, because you're just experiencing and communicating joy in the world, both in the absurdity of it at times, right, and just the, you find these elements in these characters that make them fascinating and engaging, and you use them to teach us about parts of the world, and potentially your critics would say you're having too much fun.
That's probably true. I mean, I suppose that's a fair charge, because I am very self-consciously running towards pleasure, and it's like that's what draws me to material in the first place. And it is, as I say, it's drawing me toward, I'm drawn towards that because I'm drawn towards the emotion, that I want to be in that emotional space. And that's how I get there fastest. I don't get there through sadness. I don't get there through like depression. And I just don't get there that way.
Yeah.
I can get to sadness, but I have to get there through happiness.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And it seems like you continue to experience joy despite having gone through the most difficult thing that I can imagine as a father of three. The dedication of the book reads, "In memory of Dixie Lee Lewis, you remain inside me." This is your daughter who died in a car accident 3 years ago.
Yep.
The part of Dixie that remains inside you, what does she say to you about all of this?
You know what she says?
Hullabaloo about
Can I curse on your
going
podcast?
infinite. Yes, please.
When the Twitter idiots come after me right in the beginning, she says, fuck them. She was so brave. So I knew when I wrote this book what kind of gauntlet I was going to run because of the book. I was completely aware. I was not at all surprised by the response to the book. And I knew I had the little voice in my ear when I was working on it. Do you want to kind of fiddle with it a little bit to deflect that criticism? And her, and she was this flinty. She was joyous and gorgeous, but she was so nervy. She had such a talent for like standing up to Goliath and taking a swing. She just had that in her right from the beginning of her life. And all the boys were afraid of her in the 4th grade. She was that girl, and physically afraid. Like they didn't want to play foursquare with her because she threw the ball too hard at them. Yeah. And I just thought I'm going to dedicate this thing to her, and her spirit is in it, because when I feel those moments of weakness, it's moments of cowardice. I'm gonna lean away from them. I'm gonna actually lean into the bravery. That's where the honor is. And so I have ways of keeping her around, and that's one way. It's like remembering her spirit and trying to sort of honor the best of it.
And you've said that you're in your own journey in these last 3 years, reframing the grieving process or finding a kind of new or maybe somewhat different or unique to you way of going about it. And that this may turn into an artistic work, maybe like a one-man show of some kind? Or
I've been saving up material. I guess I'd put it this way, that when you suffer the loss of a child, when you suffer loss and you suffer grief, there's a whole industry waiting for you, right? It's the question no one has an answer to. So people flail around and read the books and listen to the advice and go to the therapist and all that. And I found absolutely no consolation in any of it. And it all sounded false to me. It didn't, not completely wrong, but enough, at least partially wrong in every case. And I realized that it was because I was living so intimately with my feelings that I had a different description of them than I'd ever read or seen. And that probably in each case, the feelings are a little different. They're conditioned, they're driven by the relationship you had with the person you lost, your own nature. It really is a very private experience. And the question is like, what to do with my understanding of that private experience. And it would be sort of hypocritical to write a book about grief, since I don't think anybody, I don't think the books are where you go. However people get through it, they get through it. I don't disapprove of anybody's way of getting through it, but just for me. But I just think there is an emotional experience that I would like to recreate as part of keeping her around. And it did feel theatrical to me. It didn't feel like a book. It felt like something that would happen in a theater, and the audience would be taken through the emotion. And it felt like a one-man show. So I did start to sketch something out, and I do have a drawer. It's the Dixie drawer in my office. And when I have thoughts about what this thing would be, I just toss them into the drawer. And I think that I'll know when it's time to write it. I think the time to write is when I feel like I've arrived in some other place, and I haven't done that yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being something.
Well, I will certainly look forward to it. And I think that whatever you do next, I'm sure there's been talk of a possible sequel to Going Infinite. I don't know if that's in the cards. I don't know if there's going to be a movie.
There is.
But we're all going to read all of it. We're all going to watch all of it. Even the haters on Twitter, I think they're all going to.
Can I tell you something funny?
Consume.
So there was a quorum of the haters at the trial. Right? At Sam Bankman-Fried's trial. There were 150 journalists there. At some point. I've never signed so many books in my life as when I walked into that trial. The book was everywhere, and people who had said nasty things about it were asking me to sign it. And so there's just like this we are in a weird media environment right now, right? It's just like you can't take it too seriously.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of it is this sense that it's a requirement that people express moral outrage whenever they're adjacent to or in contact with any kind of unacceptable behavior. And if you don't express that moral outrage, then you're culpable. That leap seems new in the last decade or something.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Well, Michael Lewis, thank you so much for being with us today. Such a wonderful conversation.
Totally fun. Except for the beginning.
Okay, now that you've heard my conversation with Michael Lewis, I'm going to come out and say, I love the book. It's a page turner. You'll read it in a few sittings. It's classic Michael Lewis. If you can read it cover to cover and still believe that Sam Bankman-Fried is a disingenuous con man who cared about nothing but lining his own pockets, please let me know. We'll be discussing this on LinkedIn. Just look for my newsletter post about this episode. The truth, it seems to me, is jagged, difficult to swallow. Stories are rounded like lozenges. We take the disjointed reality of the world and file it down, sand it until it's smooth. Then we coat it with sugar, details that amuse and delight. In this sense, you could argue all stories are lies, particularly the ones that go down easiest. Going Infinite is out now in paperback. Get yourself a copy. By the way, Michael recently launched a new series in the Washington Post that I think is kind of wonderful. It's called Who is Government? He and other writers will be profiling under-the-radar public servants who keep the country running. You can find a link in our episode notes. Today's episode was written and produced by Caleb Bissinger. Sound design by Mike Toda. Special thanks to the team at Laughing Man Studios, where we recorded this conversation. And as always, to the fine folks at the LinkedIn Podcast Network. I'm Rufus Griscom. See you next week.